Hello, I'm Dango Rose. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you the latest news of the Peak to Peak region, in print, online, through our podcast, social media, and special publications. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area with our local journalists.
Hello, my name is Jamie Lammers, and welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast. This slot is typically reserved for our Music of the Mountains edition of the podcast. But this week, I wrote a historical piece talking about the performance history of the Grateful Dead here in Colorado in anticipation for a Very Jerry band coming to the Caribou Room next month. You can read the full story in the April 9th edition of the Mountaineer. This week, in lieu of a Music of the Mountains episode, I am featuring a spotlight for National Poetry Month. Today, we'll be speaking to Nederlandtown resident Joshua Davis. On March 22nd, 2026, I went to Joshua's home to interview him in person. This interview has been touched up every here and there, but for the most part, it is left unedited. It's just me and Joshua in his living room. Every now and again, my phone will go off, or his dog will come up to try and lick my face. Otherwise, I wanted to leave this conversation as untouched as I possibly could. We'll even sign out of this week's episode with Joshua reading 2 of his own poems. So now, here is my interview with Joshua Davis. All right. So, do you mind just introducing yourself real quick?
Yeah, my name is Joshua Davis. I'm a streets manager for the town of Nederland here. I've been a writer and a poet since I was 16. I'll be 45 at the end of May. I like the evolution of like what writing used to be to what it is now, as far as the expression when the process goes. And I just think it's good to keep growing, and it's something you love, and like the nurtured parts of yourself that need to be expressed, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sure. And so what got you into poetry in the first place? You know, when did that kind of?
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I was like, I had a lot of normal angst and also a lot of trauma that I didn't really know how to work through or process, and just wanted like this expression. And it was actually like heavy metal music back then that made me just kind of like what are they writing about? Like, what are they getting out in this like hyper expressive atmosphere? And I just started writing. Then I started like reading it to people and trying to like get it out there to other people and connect with other people that way, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there inspirations that have kind of stuck out to you over the years in terms of where you got started and how you developed since then?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like just as far as poets go, like loved E. Cummings when I was a teenager. Charles Bukowski when I drank in my 20s. Everybody that drinks in their 20s wants to be Charles Bukowski if they're a writer, And, as it's progressed, I'm a big fan of like Rupert Carr these days, and just kind of more of that, like, even Brodigan as well. Richard Brodigan has a lot of really awesome kind of shorter pieces that I just dig the expression with the lack of structure, I
just finished trout fishing in America because my mom got that for Christmas for me as a Christmas gift like 2-3 years ago, something like that, and I finally got around to reading it. It's good. Yeah, it's really good.
It's good. Yeah, he wrote a lot of really good short stories and poetry. It's really, I feel like he's like not talked about enough these days.
Yeah. My mom just kind of offhandedly remembered the book, which is I don't know, but yeah. And so what over the last it's been almost 30 years, I guess. So, what has inspired you most about poetry and kind of kept you coming back to that medium?
Like I said, I think it gives you a way to, or it's given me a way to express things that I would internalize otherwise. I think that, kind of culturally, and especially as men, we're kind of pushed to push things down, to keep them to ourselves, to not express our emotions in healthy ways. And I found, especially, going through life and doing trauma work and just trying to like evolve in my own mind, as far as being a more complete human being, that like it still has that, and also offers a chance to like if there's some way that you're writing about something that affects someone else in a positive way when they read it, or if it makes sense to somebody and helps them through something, then like to me that's like the purpose of artistic expression, is to give somebody else like an outlet as well, or like a conduit to feel things, and go through things and process things.
Mm-hmm. Hey, and you were talking to me a little bit before we started this interview about how you've delved into other forms of writing. You've written short stories and things along those lines before. What about poetry has stuck out to you as the format that is most expressive to you?
The freedom in it, yeah. The freedom in it, Yeah. There's a lot of like I said before we started recording, when I was younger, it would just turn into like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. Everything had to just be da 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 across the board, and then you get more and more into it. You read more and you listen to more like spoken word type stuff, and you just realize there's just so much freedom, and being a poet, and like how you can write and what the structure can be, and like what the expression is allowed to be, and it's just good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how long have you been in Ned? How long have you kind of lived in this area?
In July, it'll be 18 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in what ways has living in this mountain area especially kind of influenced your writing and poetry in general, and inspired some of the things that have developed along the way?
I gotta say, I grew up in Alabama, and I definitely felt like it was a stifling atmosphere. It seemed to be a little more dangerous to be different, which made things kind of feel like if you were different, you didn't want to be yourself around certain people. And then I moved here, and granted, I was already late 20s or 28 when I moved here. And I think it was, this is a different place, people up here are all kind of here for the same reasons. They want to be individuals. They want to be different in many ways. And everyone kind of like seems to have a level of acceptance and kind of keeping to themselves that I never really experienced growing up. So living here, it seems to be like an easier place to express myself without fear of judgment as much, I guess. And also it's just more of a liberal mindset as far as acceptance of everyone, and it's beautiful. There's no lack of inspiration when you go outside, like you go on a hike anywhere within 30 miles here, and you're going to find something that's just going to make you sit down and think about it for a minute,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And is there, how have you kind of gotten, like, have you gotten your poetry out in any specific way? Have you mainly just written it to express yourself, share it with people that how have you gotten it out there, I guess?
I've gotten a few pieces in the Mountaineer over the years. In my early 20s, I was like way into like spoken word poetry, and I had this whole shtick, like this Southern Baptist preacher. I had like a flat black brimmed hat and like a little white collar, and I just laid it fire and brimstone for everybody, and like it was a nice little shtick to get across, but now it seems like it's a lot more like just trying to get published where I can, get it out there to people, share it with people online. I share a lot on my personal Facebook page and Instagram and stuff, and things like that. It would be nice one day to publish, but it's kind of, there's that thin line between like, is it like something I want? I get really wound up if I start thinking like about the audience too much. Like, am I writing what the audience wants to hear? Instead of just writing for myself.
For sure. Is there anything that you hope people will take away from your poems when they see them online, or when you share them however you can?
One thing for me, like I had a traumatic youth growing up, and it took me a long time to understand what it meant to begin my healing. I had years of addiction. Now I'm coming up on 8 years of sobriety next week, and I think what I try to do is just write about my experience in hopes that like anyone else dealing with those things can be inspired by the fact that like it does get better at some point. If you keep working at things do get better. Mm-hmm.
And has there been anything about, in particular, the community of poetry here in Ned that has stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it's like the freedom of expression and how everybody has something different to say, about the same place and the same situation. There's like a perspective or perception that everyone has that is like really amazing when it gets down to like listening to them and reading their stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there just anything else about your work here in Netherlands, or the stuff you write, or anything else that you haven't talked about that you want people to know about, or?
Yeah, I think it's just like I said. I just want to be able to like express myself in hopes that like if someone else is going through something like that, then they could read it and feel inspired, or at least like not alone. I think a lot of that's what happened. One thing I learned in recovery years ago is that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that for a lot of people that go through addiction like that, that's it. They always wanted to fit in somewhere and belong to something. I always kind of felt alone, But like if you can find a way to connect with other people, like through something as powerful as writing, I think that's really important,
Good girl.
Life's hard for a face looker.
Yeah. Oh, you are a sweetheart. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to this special National Poetry Month Spotlight episode of the Mountain Ear Podcast. We'll be back very soon with another podcast episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening: Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Podchaser, or anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. If you want to support the Mountain Ear in general, be sure to subscribe today by heading to the mtnear.com. If you have any questions or suggestions for any of our team, you can reach out to me at media@themountaineer.com, my co-host Tyler Hickman at tyler@themountaineer.com, our editor-in-chief Barbara Hardt at info@themountaineer.com, or general inquiries at frontdesk@themountaineer.com. And now, to close out the episode, Joshua Davis, reading 2 poems he has never shared before. Thank you for listening.
This one's called I Was a Child, a spoken word piece about anger. I was a child, not a mediator, not a mood regulator, not the emotional shock absorber for a grown man's anger, simply a child. And sometimes I still say that softly to myself, like I'm reminding someone who forgets. I was a child. It was not my job to study the weather of him, the tightness in his jaw, the weight of his footsteps, or how silence could thicken right before it broke. I learned to listen before I learned to speak freely. I learned to shrink before I learned to stand tall. I thought that was maturity. It was fear. He was supposed to protect me. Instead, I became an expert in survival, navigating his mood like it was a household chore. Take out the trash, do your homework, whatever you do, don't upset your father. I swallowed anger like it was something dangerous, held it under my tongue, locked it behind my ribs, because children who cry get punished, children who protest get punished, children who feel too loudly get punished. So I stopped being anything but obedient. But anger doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in the body. It waits in the nervous system. It waits for adulthood. It waits for autonomy. It waits for the moment your body finally says enough. It's in the flinch when someone sighs too hard. It's in the way my chest tightens over something small, like a delayed plan or a minor inconvenience. A moment that should not feel like danger, but does. This anger isn't cruelty. It's a child who never got to scream. And afterwards, I always feel tired. Not from the moment, but from the years. Years of hypervigilance, years of bracing, years of confusing survival with personality. I never wanted to be angry like him. That fear lives in me. The fear that if my voice gets too loud or my frustration shows, I am becoming the very thing that hurt me. But here's what I am learning, that this anger is not cruelty. It is grief. It is the sound a silenced child makes when he is finally safe enough to speak. And that realization is often quiet, almost tender. Maybe the anger rising now is not proof that I am him. Maybe it is proof that I am no longer afraid. There is a strength that grows in sunlight, confidence, safety, and encouragement. And there is a strength forged in darkness. Ears pressed to doors, heart racing in footsteps, and body always ready. I built the second kind, but I deserve the first. I deserved softness. I deserved protection then. I deserved a childhood that did not feel like combat training, and I deserve peace now. Say it with me. I deserved protection then, and I deserve peace now. Not someday, not after I fix everything, not after I become smaller or quieter or easier, but now. I am not the storm that he was. I am the child who survived it, and I am learning to put the thunder down. Yeah?
Yeah. It's awesome.
I'm working on like trying to get back into like how to get it like the spoken word side of it.
Yeah.
Like get expressive with it again. But like I said, my mind always goes to like don't fall into that cadence.
Right.
You know?
No, that's fair.
Yeah, for sure. You want to hear more?
Yeah.
This one's called What We Hide. What we hide is often what holds us hostage. I know that now, but for most of my life, I thought survival meant silence. Silence about things that happened in childhood. Silence about the fear that follows you into adulthood. Silence about the weight you carry even when everyone around you thinks you're fine. So I learned how to numb it. Alcohol, drugs, anything that could quiet the noise in my mind. And for a while, numbing seemed to work. Because when you numb the pain, you can pretend it isn't there. You can smile, you can function. You can convince the world and sometimes yourself that you're okay. But pain doesn't just disappear because it's ignored. It waits, and eventually it has to be heard. 4 years ago, on December 2nd, everything I had buried finally caught up with me, and I had what the doctors called a nervous breakdown. 3 days in a hospital bed, doctors using words that suddenly explained so much. CPTSD, as if it needed to be more complex. Major depressive disorder. 2 diagnoses that trace their roots all the way back to childhood trauma. 2 new labels attached to my name. By that time, I had already been sober for years. Sobriety taught me something that numbing never could. That when you stop numbing the pain begins to speak. It shows up in panic and heavy mornings, in days when your own thoughts feel like a storm you can't escape. I did not like the feeling of medication. It felt like I was living in someone else's body. So I made a decision, not a perfect decision, not an easy one, but an honest one. I would stop hiding from my own mind because I had finally learned something that felt painfully true. If I do not address my trauma, it will address me. Some days are still heavy. Some days depression still tries to convince me that I'm broken or weak or alone. But I've learned something else along the way. The world is full of people carrying invisible battles. People smiling while quietly suffering. People showing up to work, raising families, living their lives while navigating storms no one else can see. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop pretending we're the only ones struggling. So if today feels heavy for you, if your thoughts are loud or your heart is tired, or the past feels closer than it should, please remember this. There is no shame in being an emotional human being. None. And if today is a bad day, that doesn't mean your story ends here. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it isn't inspiring. Sometimes healing is simply this, waking up tomorrow and trying again. Because the truth is, the bravest thing I ever did wasn't getting sober. It wasn't surviving trauma. It was finally deciding that my pain didn't deserve my silence anymore.
And that's it for our show. Subscribe online to get more access to more news, weekly updates to our community calendar, and a link to our YouTube channel by visiting themountaineer.com. Be sure to use the coupon code PODCAST when subscribing for a 10% discount, only available to our listeners. If you are in the local Peak to Peak area, be sure to pick up a print edition of The Mountaineer at a local business. I'm Dango Rose. Thank you for listening.